I'm Lauren Glenn Davitian, and I work at Common Good Vermont, and I'm also the Executive Director of the Center for Media and Democracy. Thank you all again for being here for Common Good Vermont's Spring Luncheon. Some of you may know that we've been having a fall luncheon for years and years, and so this year we just thought we would switch it to spring because we had so many fantastic events going on, and spring made a lot of sense, especially because Steve McLaughlin, who is our speaker today, was available, and and he has been traveling the country and possibly the world talking about his book, Data-Driven Nonprofits. Before I introduce Steve, I want to just make a few thank yous for all the folks that helped put this event together, not least among them all of you who are here as our guests, because the nonprofit community in Vermont, I think, is known for its forward-looking and its forward-thinking, and those of you who are here today really represent the vanguard of our movement as a social sector. So I really appreciate, we all really appreciate that you are here joining us today. I'd like to thank our staff who's here. You met Morgan. Morgan Webster is our director. She's the lovely woman in the back. Barry Silver is there with Hope Ward. Barry Silver is our communications director. Hope is our intern, and we love Hope, and hope she stays with us forever. We're not going to let her go. And then Kathleen Swanson, the fabulous Kathleen. Hello and thank you. Kathleen is our development director. And Kim Vilmer, who is recording today for Channel 17 Town Meeting TV, which is one of CCTV, Center for Media and Democracy's programs, including Common Good Vermont. I'd also like very much to thank the volunteers from AT&T who are here today, who have helped us. Thanks, AT&T. They're over there. Hello. Thank you so much. And if you haven't seen, you can get some cases for your phones. They're over there if they fit. There's some sparkly ones. So just saying. And I'd also like to thank the folks who are here helping us table. And to table is actually a verb, but to more specifically, we've invited these organizations who are working in the fields, toiling in the fields of data collection and analytics in our state. So we have the Vermont Center for Data, the Vermont Data Center, which is part of the UVM Center for Rural Studies. And we go back a long time in our partnership with them. We also have Alex Barker, who is from the U.S. Census Bureau, and Alex is going to come on up and say a few things. And we also have the Department of Health. Thank you so much, David, for being with us. Vermont Department of Health is a store of just all of these organizations are a treasure trove of data and information. And we've actually done some programming on Common Good Vermont that you can watch. We did an interview with David and his colleagues, for example, and Alexandra about the kinds of data they have available for us to use. We also have the Snelling Center for Government is here, and they have the Snelling Institute, which I think the deadline is May 1st. If you are feeling like you would like to take your leadership skills to another level, certainly the Snelling Leadership Institute is a really important way to do that, and you can find out more about it here. Benchmarks for a Better Vermont, our longtime partner that is housed with the Marlborough College, is here. And Benchmarks for a Better Vermont is really the, I would say, the infrastructure for helping us turn our results into accountability. So Kate McGowan is here from Benchmarks for a Better Vermont. And then we also have with us the Hogan Award folks, and Scott Johnston is with us, and he's going to give us a few remarks about that. First, I'd like Alex just to come up and talk about the work of the U.S. Census. Alex is the regional outreach director for the U.S. Census Bureau in our region, and she spends a lot of time traveling and letting people know about how to make the very best use of the U.S. Census data. Alex, thank you for joining us, and welcome. And your T-shirt says,
"Talk data to me."
Talk data to me.
It's my uniform. No, just kidding. Thanks for having me here today. So I'm Alexandra. I'm a data dissemination specialist with the Census Bureau. And the reason why I'm here is we are on a mission to make sure everyone who needs data has equal access. We see a lot of big corporations with access because they can hire experts, statisticians, marketing people to access our data. And now we want to make sure nonprofits, small businesses also have access to all this wealth of information that's out there from the Census Bureau every year. So if you don't know yet, we are not just around every 10 years. We are around every year. We collect data from the American Community Survey and other business surveys every month of every year from every community. So even your smallest town or village, we have data being published for the area every year in demographics, socioeconomic, and housing. And if you don't know how to access the data, please reach out to me, stop by my table, get a workshop menu. Our services are free. We work in partnership with the State Data Center. They're a great partner, so you can also use them as a resource. But we offer free trainings as you need. All I need is an excited person, even one person, to say, come help me. I have a grant. I need a training. Put a webinar. Come over to Vermont. I love invitations to come up in person. I love this place. But a webinar would work too. And we'll be glad to help you. It's our free service of the Census Bureau. Okay, thank you.
Thank you so much. She's very excited, likes to be here a lot. You love Vermont, I know you do. I'd also just like to take a moment to have Scott Johnson come, and he's with the Lamoille Family Center, and we have worked with him in many capacities over the years as part of the Vermont Data Group, and also in trying to build the infrastructure and muscle memory for us as a community to learn how to use data to be more strategic. And one of the patron saints of the movement is a man named Con Hogan, who used to run the Vermont Agency of Human Services, from whom I think many of you know. And now there is an award in his name to recognize leaders in this field, and Scott is going to tell us a little bit about that. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Lauren. How many people have heard of the Con Hogan Award? Oh, that's fantastic. And that doesn't count the people that I told about it this morning when you walked in. So for those of you that know about it and those of you that don't, the nomination process opened up on April 1st. What I want you to do is I want you to open up your program to the last page. The most important page in your program. And that'll tell you everything you need to know about the Con Hogan Award. And at the very bottom talks about the deadline on June 29th and the website to go to, hosted by the Vermont Community Foundation. This is an incredibly, I think, important award in Vermont. It just started 2 years ago. This will be the third annual award. And a group of us who have worked with Con over the past 40 years in a variety of different capacities really felt it was important to acknowledge his work, his life's work, and his efforts to make Vermont a better place to live. And he did that in a variety of different capacities. He was secretary of the agency. He was commissioner of corrections. He's now full-time member on the Green Mountain Care Board. He's done national and international consulting on results-based accountability. So he was really someone that I think embodies why we're here today, that he really thought that looking at results and using data to help us get to that end was really incredibly important. And so the award, it's a $15,000 annual award to be used by whoever gets it in any way they want to further their work or otherwise. The process is open. You can't nominate yourself, but you can nominate somebody else that you think rises to that level and is deserving of the award. So I really encourage folks to take a look at this page, go to the website where it's hosted, and think about somebody that you know in Vermont that really emulates the work of Con and his desire to really focus on the public good and good results for Vermonters. So thank you very much. Thank you, Lauren.
We also have one more guest here today. Felix, where are you? There you are. And Felix is an emerging partner for us at Common Good Vermont. He's working on Wildfire, which is a volunteer management program that he's developing with a group of folks. And I would really encourage you to have a little word with Felix about the work that he's doing, because it's a really promising platform for really kind of setting up. When I first saw the application, I'm like, oh, this looks like a dating application. And it's really smartly designed so that we can really think about how to match ourselves with organizations, and how you as organizations can reach out to people to find new volunteers and to encourage their involvement in innovative, fresh, and really I think, appealing way for all generations. So thank you so much, Felix, for being with us today. Kate, did you want to say something about Benchmarks for a Better Vermont, which I think would just is good to remind folks what's happening with benchmarks, the programs that are being offered, and how this very important initiative can help you to improve your capacity internally. And then we will get on with the introduction of our speaker.
Greetings. So I'm representing Center for New Leadership today, and they support the mission-driven organizations in our state and in the region through two avenues, partly through trainings, which includes Benchmarks for Better Vermont, which is really focused on results-based accountability, which is where we take data and turn it into action, right, and accountability. So many of you have taken those courses, and they run a couple times a year, and you can find more information at marlboro.edu. The other part of their work is to do consulting work with a whole beautiful posse of amazing consultants that really understand mission-driven organizations and can really help you move towards your mission or fill in some gaps in your organizations. I will also just note that coming up in fall, there are 2 opportunities to participate in the certification for nonprofit management, and that's a really excellent 2-month, about 12-week course that covers A to Z in running an organization, which includes data, how to tell your story, how to be accountable, how to do program performance measures, and all those good things. So thank you for the time.
Thank you, Kate. Thank you so much. And the Center for New Leadership, really, which is the mothership for all things at Marlboro related to nonprofit capacity building, is a really great initiative and a very important one for our state. So thank you for that, Kate. You know, we could not do this event without the support and I would say love from our underwriters and sponsors. And today's event is underwritten principally by Velco. Our Velco team is here. I'd like everyone to warmly thank them for helping to support this event today. And Velco helps to manage the electric grid in the state and is also involved in a number of interesting projects, including helping to predict weather, which is very data heavy, the work that they do. And so they have a vested interest in helping us as a sector to be able to use data to be efficient and effective. So we thank you very much for your support and glad you could come and join us today. Thank you. We also are supported by the A.D. Henderson Foundation, who has underwritten our work for many years, for which we are very grateful. The Vermont Community Foundation, which we are very fortunate in this state to have the kind of forward-looking community foundation that we do. And with their new director, executive director, president, Dan Smith, we will be seeing some interesting changes there, and it will be worth our while to pay attention to that. The National Life Group is a big supporter of nonprofit capacity building. VEIC has also supported this work this year, for which we are grateful. The High Meadows Fund, the Fountain Fund, C. Russell DeBurlo, one of our patrons, beloved patrons, Ben and Jerry's Foundation, and of course Channel 17 Town Meeting Television. So thank you. Let's thank all of them for helping support this work. Okay. So as Vermont nonprofits, we are very interested in improving our performance because we know that it isn't just enough to get up in the morning excited about what we have to do. Most of us are inspired by a particular passion, helping children, helping women who need to become part of the workforce, helping to make the environment a better place, helping to bring news and information to people in a non-commercial way. These are the kinds of missions that drive us and wake us up when we get up. Maybe, hopefully not in a panic, we wake up. But they wake us up and they motivate us. But that really, as we know, is no longer enough to do our work. We have to be both efficient and effective and be able to demonstrate what kinds of difference we are making in our community. So over the past 5 years in particular, hundreds of us across the state have studied how to use data to be more strategic. This is a thing called adaptive capacity. And in the world of nonprofit capacity building, there's leadership building, there's technical capacity, there is adaptive capacity, the ability to use data to be more strategic. On a population level, we've trained hundreds of nonprofits to be able to do this work through Benchmarks for a Better Vermont. We have created initiatives like the Vermont Data Collaborative and most recently the Collective Impact Movement, which is helping us to think about not just how we use data within our own organizations, but how we can join together in order to turn the curve on issues that are really pernicious and challenging and work that we cannot do unless we work together. And the collective impact frame gives us a way to think about doing that work together. We have a growing network of open data projects, and many of them are here today. Data that you don't have to pay for, data that is available already in the state's treasure chest, but sometimes is hard to get at. And so this idea of open data is one that is growing and is very important for us to understand and to think about. Many of those here today, many of us, are working on these kinds of projects. And the infrastructure for data collection and analysis is actually very robust in our state. We're in a pretty good place. We could certainly be in a better place. The data could be more open. We could be smarter about how to do it. We could have more resources to figure out what to do with the data that we have, but really we have and should be very pleased and impressed with the work that we have done in Vermont over the past many years. We can always be smarter about how we collect and analyze. And that's why it's helpful to have trusted advice. And that's why we've invited Steve McLaughlin here today. Some of you are already familiar with Steve's work at Blackbaud. I was very blessed to meet Steve when we served on the N10 board together, and N10 is the Nonprofit Technology Network. If some of you are not familiar with N10, be sure to go home and Google it, because the workshops and the training opportunities that N10 offers just on their website, but also at their national conference, is of great value and use to the work that we do here and across the country. So Steve actually taught me on that N10 board how to make decisions as a board member that were data informed. So not just to say, hey, here's a good idea, let's do this. Instead, Steve would say, well, what does the data tell us? What are the customers that we have at N10 actually, what services are they interested in using? And what should we be building on and doing more of? And I have to say, I learned a great deal from you about how to make decisions in that way, rather than the impulsive way that I typically had been making them personally. Steve is a vice president at Blackbaud, where he helps clients make sense of their fundraising metrics, but he does more than that, which is why he wrote this book, Data-Driven Nonprofits, to take what he knows and what he's been sharing for many years and in effect clone himself so that we could all learn from him. And so we are actually very fortunate to have him in person. His book is available in the back, and we will tell you about that in a little bit. But we're glad to have Steve here in person, and thank you so much. Let's give him a warm welcome. Would you like this or this?
I'll try this.
Okay.
I can be loud.
Okay. Yeah, you can. And sassy. Loud and sassy.
Awesome.
Okay.
Thanks, Lauren Glenn.
Thank you.
So, good afternoon, everyone. Appreciate you having me here. I am originally a native of Western New York and have not been back to Vermont since I was a kid. And having lived in Charleston, South Carolina for almost 13 years, the sight of hills and mountains is a refreshing change. So thanks for having me here today. And thanks for coming here. This topic about data and the use of data continues to grow in importance. And I want to talk about a number of factors and things that go into that. So again, thanks to the folks at Common Good Vermont, for Lauren Glenn for inviting me to come here today. I also need to thank my employer, Blackbaud, for allowing me to skip work today to be with you here. And for the past 13 years at Blackbaud, I've worked with a wide range of organizations on how they use their data, whether it's digital, online, offline, analog, et cetera, to try and improve their results. Now, I also have a bit of a confession to make, which is that while I spend nearly every day dealing with data and analysis, I am a decalculus student. I do not come to this from a mathematics background, a statistics background. I understand what a regression analysis is, but don't ask me to do one. And so I find that that is also true of lots of the nonprofits and lots of the nonprofit professionals that I get the opportunity to work with, which is we don't come to this as, you know, the statistical, the analytical side being natural. We oftentimes come to it from a different perspective. But I am proof that if you are willing to put the time into it, you're willing to want to learn and understand how these things happen, that it's possible. Now, that having been said, I really want to focus on what you can get out of data and drive out of data and those types of things. And so a lot of what I want to talk about today is based on some things that I learned while writing this book, Data-Driven Nonprofits. And you know, I had worked on books in the past, and I said that I would never write another book again. And so I was always asked, well, you know, hey, our organization is really trying to understand more about data or analytics. What could we read? And I really found that there wasn't something out there that was a no-brainer guide to doing some of this type of stuff. And so that led me down this path of writing this book. And what I want to share with you today are some of the secrets that I learned from nonprofits who are being successful with the use of data. The book's about 81,000 words long. I won't be that long today. I'm going to talk for a little while, but I also want to leave time at the end for your questions as well, because I'm sure you'll have some. So my goals today are three things: teach you something, get under your skin a little bit, and obviously make you want to read the book. So let's start at the beginning. Data is the most abundant element in the social goods sector. If we think about the amount of data we deal with, whether it's our supporters, our staff, our activists, our programmatic work, that is a tremendous amount of data. And in some cases, that amount of data can certainly be overwhelming at times. But when we're able to take that data and make connections across that data, to connect the dots, if you will, then what that leads to is our ability to get insights, to answer questions, to understand, why does something happen the way it happens? Why does that work? It can also be helpful in understanding, well, why didn't that work? And what should we do about it? Or maybe we should stop doing that thing that didn't work. But ultimately, what data gets you to is value. I would argue that data is the raw material for value. Sometimes you've got to get it out of the ground and clean it up and deal with it and make some sense of it. But data ultimately is that raw material value. Value when we're trying to understand, how do we improve our programmatic work? How do we improve our engagement? How do we improve our results? That's really what data allows you to do. Let me give you a quick example from the corporate world. So when Walmart looks at petabytes of data, a petabyte is 1,000,000 gigabytes. You know those little thumb drives where you can put a gigabyte on it? Imagine you had 1,000,000 of those stacked up on your table. That's a petabyte. And Walmart deals with anywhere between 50 and 60 petabytes of retail data. And they use that data to answer questions like, when a storm is coming through an area, what's something we want to make sure we have on our store shelves? People are coming into the store, we want to make sure we have something. Let's look at the data. Let's try to answer that question, because knowing the answer to that question would be very valuable. And so, of course, Walmart looked at petabytes of data, and they found that when a major storm comes through an area, there's something that pops in the data set, quite literally, and it is Pop-Tarts. To be specific, strawberry Pop-Tarts. The sales of strawberry Pop-Tarts are 7 times the normal rate when a storm rolls through an area where a store is. Now, if you'd asked any store manager, any associate, and asked them what was the thing that we really need to make sure we have on the shelves, you would have heard things like water, beer, milk, eggs, toast, like everyone's making French toast when the power goes out, right? No, turns out the answer is Pop-Tarts, and you wouldn't have got the answer if you'd asked people. What you really had to do was analyze and look in the data. And so what I find, if that is true for what happens with Walmart, I can guarantee you that every single one of your organizations has a strawberry Pop-Tart somewhere in your data set. There is something in there that won't come to you naturally, that won't come based on someone's opinion. It won't be based on an anecdote, because anecdotes are not the plural of data, right? Even though we try. That there's some sort of strawberry Pop-Tart. And so what I wanted to understand was, why is it that the nonprofit sector struggles in this area, right? We have the technology, we have the data. What is it that holds us back? And so, being a bit of a history buff, I started to dig into, well, how did we get here, right? And why are things the way they are? And if you want to know the answer, you need to go back to April 5th, 1905. So on the cover of the Washington Post that day, there's an article about the president making a speech. There's an article about the controversial new mayor of Chicago. And there's an article about a terrorist being arrested following a bombing. So plus ça change, plus c'est la même chose, the more things change, the more they stay the same. But on page 2 of the Post that day, there was a story called Money is Best Talker. And it was about a fundraising dinner that we're all familiar with, held the night before in Washington, D.C. And there were 2 individuals at that dinner who you probably never heard before, who've had a tremendous impact on the nonprofit sector. Charles Sumner Ward and Lyman Love Pierce. Charles Sumner Ward was the head fundraiser of the YMCA in Chicago, and he was brought in to help his colleague, Lyman Love Pierce, who was running the Y in D.C., because they were trying to raise $300,000 to build a new building in D.C. So 1905, $300,000, no small sum of money. And as what tends to happen, they were a little bit short of their goal. They were about $80,000 short of their goal, and so they held a fundraising dinner. And they did something at that fundraising dinner that has been repeated ever since, but was really done for the first time. They announced a couple of key things. One, they were the first fundraisers to hire a publicist. They were the first fundraisers to fund advertising through a corporate donation. They went and got a major gift pledge from some guy named John D. Rockefeller. They limited the campaign to 27 days. They said, over the next 27 days, we're going to raise the remaining $80,000 and meet our goal. And they used a campaign countdown clock to track their progress. Now, these are not sort of new concepts in 2017. The idea of we're going to use corporate sponsors to help us with advertising, to put something on. We're going to help get PR out there and let people know about things are happening. We're going to go to a major gift donor and get them to pledge so that draws in the gifts of other individuals. And we're going to time box that campaign because humans like time limits on things. Now, I would argue that for the next 111 years, the nonprofit sector sort of done copy, cut, paste. But Ward and Pierce literally invented this stuff, literally did this stuff for the first time. And you see this in some other things they did. These days, the big rage is crowdfunding. How many of you heard of this crowdfunding thing? It's huge. Crowdfunding's huge, right? But it's not new. Ward and Pierce did crowdfunding in New York City in 1914. They raised $4 million in a week. It's not new. I know Facebook's new, but crowdfunding is not new. People like to talk about, we need monthly donors. We need mid-level donors. Yes, you do. And Ward and Pierce did that in London in 1916. Here's an advert from the YMCA. Monthly donors, would you be willing to make a £1 per month donation to the Y? Ooh, mid-level donors, would you be willing to make a £500 gift to the Y? Not new. Not new at all. Between 1905 and 1923, Ward and Pierce would raise over $350 million on behalf of a large number of organizations in the US, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, and the UK. To put that in perspective, that's about $5 billion today's money. And Ward and Pierce did all of this without data, without technology, without Facebook, without Excel spreadsheets. There was no tech involved. Now, that's both the problem and the opportunity, which is for the next 100 years or so, lots of what nonprofits do is a clone, a copy of Ward and Pierce's tactics And they forget about the fact that they have technology, they have data, they have other things available to them that Ward and Pierce didn't. So let's think for a minute about the technology changes that we've seen in the last 50 years. So we go to July 20th, 1969, Neil and Buzz land on the moon. And how was that possible? Well, they had this thing called the Apollo Guidance Computer, which is the most sophisticated piece of machinery ever created until that time by mankind. Cost about $150,000 to build. They only made a few of them. And it had 64 kilobytes of memory. And if you recall, the computer was overloaded, and Neil had to take over and make sure it landed on the moon. So again, we're used to technology not always working. Compare that to the modern equivalent. What's the most sophisticated thing we've built now? It's the Apple Watch. It's $299. Wait till this summer, it'll be $199. And it has 512 megabytes of memory, and it tells time. And we look at this stuff like this is probably a giveaway at lots of places now, right? It's like this amazing thing, and we don't even care because we'll just give it away, right? The other thing is, so that's the emergence of technology. Think of how far we've come in a very short period of time. Then let's talk about data. So this is an important date, October 23rd, 1997. There's a conference of rocket scientists, literally rocket scientists out in Phoenix, Arizona. And these two guys who work for JPL, Michael Cox and David Ellsworth, they presented a paper about how they were trying to crunch all of this scientific data, but the computers just couldn't keep up with it. They couldn't visualize it fast enough. And they called this the problem of big data. This is the first place this term of big data actually appears. And in this case, it's actually the problem of big data. That they didn't have the hardware, the technology, the machinery to keep up with all the things that they wanted to do. Now you fast forward 30 years, again, we don't have that issue now. We're dealing with petabytes of data. We're able to deal with massive amounts of data and do this type of processing. So technology isn't a limiting factor, and our ability to make sense out of the data is no longer a limiting factor either. Now, this term big data gets tossed around a lot. If we get sort of techie and wonky, we'd say, well, this is about the analysis of structured, semi-structured, and unstructured data. But to me, big data is about how are you analyzing large sets of data to get value? Because ultimately, I'm a big believer, it's not about the volume of the data, it's about the value of the data, right? The kid who dies with the most data does not win, right? This is not a contest to see who can amass the most amount of data. What we're really focused on is how do we get value out of that data? And again, data is a raw material for that value you want to create. Now, that doesn't mean that we aren't oftentimes overwhelmed by data, or we will hear or read things about, well, 90% of all the data in the world was invented in the past 3 years, and that statistic's about 3 years old, so now what's that percentage? Or I think there's like a requirement that if you're going to talk about big data, you have to have a slide that talks about all the things that happen on the internet in a minute, right? That we're sort of supposed to be impressed by this. But I think most of the stats that you hear about are TBU. They are true but useless. Because most of them don't really have anything to do with what happens in the social goods sector, right? That how many products are sold per minute on Amazon really doesn't have anything to do with most of the work that you do here in this room. And instead, we have other statistics that we could look at if we choose to about the nonprofit sector. Like understanding things that last year, the average age of a donor in the US was 62 years old. They made 1.4 gifts to nonprofits. The median gift below $1,000 is $20. The median gift above $1,000 is $1,200. 70% of online donations are made on a mobile device. If I know those things, I now influence my decision making, right? I have that information. It's just not stats that you can use at a cocktail party. It's something when you go back to your office, you can look at and decide how do you want to make sense of it. So there's this convergence of data, there's this convergence of technology, but there's a challenge here, which is where are we at in the nonprofit sector? So if we gauge the health of the sector in the US based on giving, what's that data tell us? So this is from June 14th of last year. This is Giving USA's data. So for 50 years, Giving USA track charitable giving in the U.S., and by their estimate, there was a little over $370 billion given in the U.S. last year. They'll have new data out in June. About 71% of that comes from individuals, another 9% from bequests, which are just a different type of individual. So 80% of giving is from individuals. That's a lot. That's most of it. Only about 5% from corporations, 16% from foundations. Now, another stat that we hear tossed out there all the time is, how much giving relative to GDP? To put it in context, giving is about 2% of GDP in the U.S. 1% of GDP is agriculture, fishing, hunting. 3% of GDP is administrative and waste management services. So if you want to know where you fit in the mix, you're somewhere in the middle. Now, this supposes that the health of the economy has any correlation to the amount of good that happens. And while this statistic is mentioned a lot, and people talk about what do we do to be more of GDP, I actually think it's the wrong statistic to look at. But there's another stat that Giving USA publishes. It's deep in the appendices. Very few people notice it, but here it is, which is individual giving as a percentage of disposable personal income. Because if 80% of giving is coming from individuals, don't you want to know how much of that giving is because it's disposable income? And when I say disposable income, it's what are the things I buy that iWatch or the Apple Watch, that iPhone, my Netflix account? That's disposable income. That's what you choose to do after you've paid your rent and your taxes and your mortgage and all the other stuff, right? It's disposable income. It is a choice. And for the past 40 years, that's been about 2% as well. This is a discussion not about share of the economy, it's about share of wallet, right? How do I compete for share of wallet with all the other things and understanding what does that mean? And it's about 2%. I think we have a much better chance of raising 2% of disposable income than probably 2% of GDP. To give you some sense, at Blackbaud, for the past several years, we've published something called the Charitable Giving Report. Over this past year, we looked at a little more than $23 billion in fundraising from 2016, and our estimate is overall giving in 2016 grew about 1%, almost flat on a year-over-year basis. Online giving up almost 8%. Now you might say, wow, that's awesome, so we should double down on the internet because it's growing so fast. But hold on, there's another important stat, which is that less than 10% of charitable giving is online, which often surprises people. What's important to note is, according to the Commerce Department, only about 8% of retail sales happen on the internet. So it's actually a pretty close number. I know everyone thinks everyone buys everything from Amazon and Amazon Prime. Turns out no. Brick and mortar is still around, which probably explains why Amazon is building brick and mortar stores. There's some other troubling signs, though, too, in addition to sort of relatively flat growth. Last year, first-year donor retention was 29%, and first-year online donor retention was 21%, section even lower, right? So imagine if you owned a restaurant here in town and only 3 out of every 10 people ever came back. You would probably be a former restaurant owner at some point, right? Now, the flip side of this is multi-year donor retention, right? If I get a donor to give 2 or more years, it's around 60%, right? So it more than doubles. If I just get that person to give for 2 or more consecutive years, I more than double the retention rate, right? And so when you know that, it may totally change your strategy, which is there are so many organizations who are very focused on that first gift, acquiring that first gift, when in reality, you should probably be more focused on the second gift, because the second gift is everything. The second gift results in higher retention, higher lifetime value. First gift is table stakes. The second gift more than doubles your results. And so if knowing the numbers, knowing the data, if you went back to your organization and said, what if it was all about the second gift? What if everything we did was about the second gift, not the first gift? I guarantee you would influence your behavior and your results. So we have a bit of a problem. How do we solve it? Well, I'll tell you one way not to solve it is throwing more people, right? Throwing more people at the problem does not scale. And it's not as though lots of you have been given unlimited budgets to hire as many people as you want to throw at the problem either, right? So the days of, well, we'll just add more people and try and solve it that way, it does not scale. Thankfully, this is where data, technology become your new BFF, right? Because it does scale, and it doesn't take vacations, and it doesn't call in sick, and it's able to help you in a lot of ways that I want to talk about. So, in the book, when I started writing it, I had two paths that I could have taken. So Robert Frostian getting here for a second. So the two paths would have been, one, I could have told you about all the things that you're supposed to do that you're probably not going to do, right? Eat your vegetables, clean your data, do more analysis, all that type of stuff. And instead, what I wanted to focus on were organizations who were being successful with the use of data, find out what is it that they're doing, and explain why there's no reason why you can't do the same thing. And the other thing that I did is I wanted to make sure that I had a wide variety of organizations. I wanted to make sure that there wasn't just some type of organization that had a monopoly on being really good with data. So I talked to small organizations, medium-sized organizations, large organizations, organizations of different causes, different missions, different geographies, to really nail down how is it that they were being successful. And what I want to share are some of the secrets from these organizations and what is it that they do differently that allows them to be successful. So, secret number one, data health. All of these organizations place a priority and an emphasis on having healthy data. Now, one of the reasons this is a problem, I think, is today we refer to this as things like data hygiene, right? So our terminology is sort of painful. Like data hygiene feels like 45 minutes in a semi-reclining chair, some discomfort. Like data hygiene is not, no one's getting excited about data hygiene. If the title of today's talk was data hygiene, this room would be half empty. And now would probably be completely empty, right? I like to call it data health. Data health is good. It's good for you, right? It's something we should do. We get the marketing folks involved. We get a logo, branding. I don't know. I think we have a marketing problem here. But I think it's mostly, if we start thinking about this as data health, not data hygiene, it's a big step forward. Now, why does this matter? So Target Analytics, which is a division of Blackbaud, looked across thousands of nonprofit organizations, and they looked at one very simple piece of information, which is, can you mail to someone? Can you send a piece of mail to someone? Yes or no? As it turns out, lots of organizations struggle in their data health and data quality in this area. So we found that the average nonprofit, 18% of their file had invalid postal addresses. Even death will not prevent us from attempting to mail you. The worst organizations, 3% of their file, still had deceased supporters on the record, right? We're talking about addresses here, like addresses. We're not getting into exotic, I'm not asking for Snapchat accounts or Instagram handles. We're just talking about address data, right? We estimate that it costs nonprofits about $21.8 million a year in lost postage and mailing costs just because you have bad address data. And it's a completely solvable problem, right? It's not like we're looking for a cure here. We've already found it. It is actually possible to keep your address data clean and up to date. And there are lots of vendors and lots of providers who do it, and the Postal Service in this country is very pleased when you do it as well, right? But again, addresses, the state of address data is a problem. What happens when we look at other pieces of information like missing phone numbers, missing email addresses? The average nonprofit is missing email addresses on 74% of their house file. And it's not like email is a new thing. I mean, the guy who invented email died this past summer, so it's been around a while, right? Most of us have been using email for a good 20 to 25 years, right? There's lots of talk about millennials. I'll get to that later. But how are you supposed to segment your supporters into different age groups if you don't have the age data? I don't know how you do that. Do you guess? Right? Again, this is a data health issue, right? And so when I talk about data health, there's really three components. The quality of the data, right? Is it correct? The completeness of the data. Where are we missing pieces in the data? And then the third piece, I'll give you, there's some problems here, is data design, right? 95% of data health is about quality and completeness. I would, also say there are some design issues. When I say data design issues, I mean things like, well, Bob decided he didn't want to use the first class field in our system, so he created a custom field and he put all that data in it. Oh, that's good, so could we talk to Bob about how that's being used? No, he doesn't work here anymore, right? That's a data design issue. And, to be fair, sometimes us software companies do things in the technology that don't always make the most design sense. Now, we will tell you, well, that's working as designed. Sometimes we mess up there too. But about 95% of data health is quality and completeness. Only about 5% of it are these design things. But again, we use the design examples as anecdotes to explain, well, why we can't do something. It's usually not why it's really happening. Secret number 2. These organizations have champions at all levels. This is a quote from Kate Chamberlain at Memorial Sloan Kettering. And she says, we're trying to think about it in terms of surfacing the right piece of information to the right person at the right time so they can really use it on behalf of the institution, right? That's a mindset that isn't, oh, here's the data you asked for, or go get the report yourself. It's, hey, I'm trying to help other people in the institution. How can I help them do that, right? And she is a champion at Memorial Sloan Kettering. She's not at the top of the organization. She's not at the bottom of the organization. She's somewhere in the middle trying to help out. And what she's found is it's really important to be able to partner with people to make that happen, right? Now, I just talked to you about some examples of how you lose money, time, and resources through bad data. Let me talk to you what you can gain by having the right types of data. So what gets measured gets treasured. Again, Target Analytics looked at thousands of nonprofits, and they ran some predictive models, and they found that the average nonprofit is leaving about $3.7 million on the table in untapped giving potential, about $52 for an annual fund donor, about $1,100 for a major gift donor. I'll break this down in a little bit, but it's important to understand that there are opportunities, hidden treasure oftentimes in the data that often go overlooked, right? And the ability to do simple predictive analytics, because oftentimes, while you may know what that individual is giving to your organization, what you don't know is how much are they giving to other organizations. There's sort of a blind spot in your data where you think, oh, well, Mr. and Mrs. Smith give us $150 every year, but what you don't know is they give another organization $5,000 a year, and why is that? Right? This is a quote from Margaret Williams at the University of South Dakota. She says, you can't just buy data, stick it in the computer, sit back, and think it's going to do all the work for you. You have to sell it to your major gift officers, or sell it to anyone fill in the blank, right? That you've got to make sure that you're a champion for the use of data, but also making sure that other people in the organization can get value from it as well. Now, some of this is interrupted by the HIPPO problem. The HIPPO problem is the highest paid person's opinion. All right? We're going to make it blue. Why are we making it blue? The boss says it's blue. That's just, don't ask, we're doing it. We need to grow by 12% next year. Why 12%? Is that based on some statistical analysis of what the trend is? Nope, 12% is what the boss came up with. The HIPPO says we're going to grow 12%, that's what we're going to do, right? So this happens, and there's a great quote by a guy named Jim Barksdale, who used to run, he's chairman at Netscape. He said, if we have data, let's bring data. If we have opinions, let's use mine. And this happens all the time, right? That people want to bring their opinion, and this is why data is your new best friend, because data is what allows you to combat the HIPPO problem, right? It allows you to support an argument versus, well, I just think that's what we should do, right? Gut instinct. Now, this also means that we sometimes have to be vigilant about things that we see out there in the wild about data that aren't always necessarily so. This is a great quote from Mike Montiero. Your personal tastes are not a success metric. Write that down. Give it to someone you know. All right? So here's a statistic. 95.4% of Americans give to charity. And I know that's true because if you Google this, you'll find all these articles with all these headlines and all these statements that talk about how 95.4% of Americans give to charity. And there's just one problem with the statistic. It's not true. Here's the actual statistic. 95.4% of high net worth households, incomes greater than $200,000 per year, gave to charity in 2011 based on a survey sent to 20,000 high net worth donors in America's wealthiest neighborhoods, and the sample size is like 700 responses. That doesn't fit in the headline. I know it's hard, especially when it's all caps. Stop shouting. But that's the actual stat. The problem is someone sees that statistic, it gets repeated, it gets repeated, it gets repeated, and it's like that telephone game when we're kids we play, and then you get to the person at the end, it resembles nothing like it originally was, right? My other favorite one recently is 30% of all giving happens in December. No, it doesn't. It's about 17% if we're counting, which we should be. So the other thing is, sometimes during an election year, we like to say, oh, you know, we're going to be off on our numbers because it's an election year. And you know, in an election year, people give less to charities and they're giving to the political campaigns. So typically in an election year, around September, October, there's concern about hitting the number, and we have something we can blame the number for. So we did some research to look in to see, is this true? Turns out it's not true. Political donors are more generous, not less generous. In fact, people who don't give to political parties are less generous. We looked at this for the 2011-2012 cycle. We will look at it again for 2015-2016, although I'm not expecting it to change. But in general, what we found is people who give to political campaigns are more generous to charities, not less generous to charities. Interesting factoid, the 25 to 34 segment was the most generous. They gave almost 11% more to charity when they were a political donor. And that's your Bernie Sanders effect right there, living in the data. Because keep in mind, that's 2011, 2012. Fast forward one election cycle, highly engaged people. The answer was in the data. It was in there. Some charities do better than others, so we broke it down by sector. Political donors to human services charities are much more generous, not less so. Again, there's this myth until you actually see the data and what happens there. Another myth, so let's talk about millennials. Millennials are great. I'm married to one, but this myth that we need to suddenly shift everything we do to optimize for millennials, maybe we should look at some data on that one. Just maybe we should look at some data. So that's what we did. We looked at billions of dollars in giving, and we broke it down by all the different age groups. The other thing we used here as well, our friends at the Census Department help us understand percentage of U.S. population. So millennials, Gen Y, is now the largest segment of the U.S. population, but they're only about 5% of giving in terms of revenue, and about 7% of the donated population. And the reality is, if you look at the data, greatest generation, silent generation, and baby boomers represent over 76% of giving, and that's likely to still be the case 5 years from now, and probably still going to be the case 10 years from now. I'm not suggesting that you ignore Gen X and Gen Y. I'm just saying that you be proportional in where you spend your time and attention. Should you engage younger donors? Yes, although younger is relative. As I said, the average age of a donor in the U.S. last year was 62. Younger donors are in their 50s, right? Engage with younger donors. Get them to engage, volunteer, participate. But if you are betting your hopes on your fundraising growth in this year's plan or the next few years' plan, it's not going to come likely from these groups. It will happen later. It's just not going to happen now. Secret number 3, data is not a foreign object. It's probably one of my favorite quotes from the book. It's from Christoph Gorder at Charity Water, and he says, data is not a foreign object. Data is just part of what you do. It's part of the day-to-day fabric of the organization. Now, I recognize that's true at Charity Water and some of the other books, some of the other organizations in the book. It's probably true of some of the organizations in the room here today, but I will also grant you it's not true of everybody, right? We're moving in this direction. I base the state of technological advancement based on what my parents think I do for a living. And so 20 years ago, it was, well, Steve works on computers. And so you come home for Thanksgiving and you fix the dot matrix printer because Steve works on computers. But we all work on computers. There's no specialized skill now to work on computers. And then maybe 10 years ago it was, well, Steve works on the internet. And so you come home for Thanksgiving and you fix the Wi-Fi because Steve works on computers. How do you get iTunes to work? Okay, Dad, we'll figure this out. Fast forward to today. At some point, working with data is not going to be a specialized skill. It will just be how we do things. It's not a foreign object. Now, that does not mean that we're all doing regression analysis and that type of work. Anybody in the room know what endogeneity is? All right, my streak continues. This is like my 15th talk, and no one in the room has ever raised their hand. Great. You don't need to know what it is. It's a statistical concept about why there's an error in your model. You don't need to understand endogeneity or how to do regression analysis or what a p-value is to make data part of what you do on a day-to-day basis, right? You just have to start doing it and making sense of it. Now, part of this is about your maturity. How mature are you in your use of data? And in the book, I have this scale that starts at 0 and goes up to 4. So 0 is, do you use data, right? And using data just means, did it happen? If we don't have data, it didn't happen, right? Then you move up to descriptive analytics, diagnostic analytics, predictive analytics, and prescriptive analytics. Now, most organizations don't move beyond sort of diagnostic analytics. So they have dashboards, or they've got reports. There's some reminder that keeps going off until they turn that reminder off. And one of the big challenges, especially with reports, is, when we use reports, it's like driving using the rearview mirror, because it's looking at stuff that happened in the past. And while driving with the rearview mirror is useful over short distances, I don't recommend it on a long journey. But yet, think of how much happens in your organization based on a report. But that report is about something that already happened. It doesn't tell you what's happening right now, and it certainly doesn't help to tell you what's likely to happen in the future. Now, to be more mature, there has to be more use of these 3 types of analytics: descriptive analytics, predictive analytics, and prescriptive analytics. I'm going to break these down. Descriptive analytics is about what happened. Almost everyone in this room has probably used descriptive analytics, even if you've never called it that. So descriptive analytics are things that allow you to put things into groups. If you've ever written a query, ever asked someone to write a query, if you've ever done segmentation or asked someone to do segmentation for you, you've used descriptive analytics, right? You've taken some characteristics about a particular group, zip code, age, income, were they a volunteer or not, and you put them into groups. That's descriptive analytics, right? I have all these shapes, and all I want to do is put circles with circles and triangles with triangles. That's descriptive analytics. Very useful, very valuable, but it has limitations. It doesn't tell you if that square is ever going to become a star. Can't do that. And it doesn't tell you about people not in a particular group. So useful, but only useful to a particular point. If you want to be able to understand what's likely to happen in the future, you have to start looking at things called predictive analytics. Predictive analytics are about what will happen, or specifically, what has a high probability, statistically speaking, of actually happening. It's not a perfect science, but I would argue it's better than guessing. And so with predictive analytics, what we're looking at is you have a question you want to answer, like, is this group of supporters likely to continue to support us in the future? Well, how do you do that? You do some predictive analytics. You look at, well, who currently fits that profile? And then you use that data to use both dependent and independent variables to to determine, what are other people who look like that? Who are my stars today? Can you help me predict who are other likely stars in my data as well, right? All around answering a particular question. And then we move to prescriptive analytics, which is newer, and I think in some ways a lot of organizations may skip predictive entirely and just go straight to prescriptive. There's too much math involved, right? And so prescriptive analytics are like, what should we do? Given multiple choices, what should we do, right? I'm here, I have multiple choices available to me, which one should I pick? Kind of like if you use Netflix or Amazon or iTunes, you're already used to prescriptive analytics. They make a recommendation. We've looked at all the movies you've watched. We've looked at all the dinosaur cartoons your kids have watched, and this is probably the next set of dinosaur cartoons they're going to want to watch. Wow, how does it know that? It's prescriptive analytics. That's how it does it. Right? Now, when we talk about the use of prescriptive analytics, we have to talk about artificial intelligence. Usually in the movies, artificial intelligence means bad things for humankind, right? There's a rogue robot, it's the end of civilization, sort of a stark view on artificial intelligence, right? Anyone remember this? This was Clippy, right? The Microsoft assistant. And Clippy would surprise us. It would pop up. Oh, it looks like you're writing a letter. And when we first saw this, we're like, whoa, that's sort of creepy and not very useful, right? Clippy was crappy AI, right? But AI nonetheless, right? Give it a few years and it gets better. I would argue that Clippy is the grandfather of Siri and Cortana and Alexa. Anyone have an Alexa device in their house, right? I just read an article about Mattel is producing an AI toy called Aristotle that you can put with your kids, and as your kids get older, it learns things, it recommends things. Clippy was bad. We've had time. It's gotten better. And within our lifetimes, we will have an intelligent agent on a mobile device that will help us do nonprofit stuff. And it won't be a real shock to us because we're sort of already used to it in our day-to-day lives, right? If you've used GPS for at least a decade, right? If you've used Waze, if you've used any of that stuff when you're traveling, you're already accustomed to it. You're already used to it. The technology will also happen for things that happen in the nonprofit sector, except it won't be, Siri, tell me what the weather's going to be. It's going to be, Siri, tell me which donors I'm supposed to call today, right? It's just the technology, and it'll be part of what we do on a day-to-day basis. At Blackbaud, we sort of have a particular view on the use of AI, which is AI by itself isn't very useful. Because really what AI is about is artificial intelligence is trying to learn things. And it learns based on data. It learns based on experience. And so there's some AI that's very focused on how do we sell more strawberry Pop-Tarts. That's not actually going to be very helpful to you in the nonprofit sector. We really believe in this idea of there's something called social good science, which is there are very specific things that happen in the nonprofit sector that are different than the commercial world, and that how we use AI to solve those problems is probably going to be different. That it's not going to be something commercial that actually works for the sector. It's going to be something that's smart and has learned how things in the social good sector work. Let me give you an example. So up until now, I think I've avoided mentioning anything related to Blackbaud until now. But so this is a perfect example. So this is one of our tools, and what happens is we learned that fundraisers are very busy people, and that the use of sticky notes to decide what they should do on any given day isn't a really good strategy, right? So wouldn't it be great if every day, when a fundraiser comes into work, the system is smart enough to say, hey, these are the 4 people you should contact today. If you do nothing else today, if you talk to no one else, these are the 4 people. And why? Because it's using data and analytics and AI behind the scenes to queue up what it believes are the best things for you to focus on. It's helping you prioritize what you should do. So for example, Mark Adamson has made a recent gift, and yet he's had no contact. And everything that we know says that's bad. Recent donor, no contact. That tends to lead to someone not wanting to give to the organization again. That's bad. We should do something about it. And it happens that this person, is assigned to you and you should do something. Diane, she has an upcoming birthday. Again, no contact. You'd be amazed how often every day for a lot of people they've had no contact, right? But all the system is doing is just gently recommending, hey, you have a lot of things going on today. If you do nothing else, do something with these individuals. And it just becomes part of your habit. You get in the habit of doing it. You get used to working on this stuff on a pretty regular basis. Now, the other thing that's different in the past few years is it used to be that if you ever wanted to do any predictive modeling, predictive analytics, any of this complicated stuff, you had to understand what's on the left side of the screen, which is there's all this mathematics, there's formulaic stuff involved, and a lot of gibberish, right? And what we found was most people in the sector are pretty busy and they just want the answer to the question, right? Like, you don't need to show me the mathematics, you don't need to show me the formula, I just want the answer. And so what we started to do is embedding these answers directly in the technology. Things like, this person, what's their wealth rating, right, on a 5-star scale? And I can quickly understand that a 5-star is better than a 3-star is better than a 2-star, right? That there's a recommended next ask amount. Everything about this individual tells us that your next ask amount to this individual should be about this particular amount rather than guessing. Because what we found is when you leave it to humans without data, they actually tend to under ask, right? Which shows up in the data time and time and time again, right? And wouldn't it be great if I'm building a list or I'm doing something that the analytics are part of the way that I can filter on the data, right? I'm putting a list together. I have a bunch of event attendees coming to an event this Saturday. In addition to knowing which people are coming to the event, wouldn't I want to know something more about those people, right? It's using that analytics, that stuff on a day-to-day basis. It's not a foreign object. So a quote from Roger Craver at the Agitator. He says, it's no longer who has the biggest database, it's who has the most valuable database. It's like the third time I've used that phrase today. It's pretty important. Again, where's the value? How do you drive value and results? Secret number 4, good storytellers. All good stories have data. 3 little pigs, Goldilocks and the 3 bears, 1 fish, 2 fish, red fish, blue fish, right? 12th night. All the good stories have numbers and data in them. Right? Think about that. Think about the number of stories that all involve 3 for some reason. We need to do research into why are there 3 bears, why are there 3 pigs. This is Bob Philbin, who's the chief data scientist at Crisis Text Line. And Bob says, data storytelling not only leads to organizational change, but it also reinforces and reinvigorates that underlying data culture. Bob is a data guy, but he believes that his most important job is to be a good storyteller. And that when he tells stories, data should be part of those stories, right? And I should remind you that the data does not speak for itself. How many of us have been in a meeting, you show up, someone puts some slides up, there's some charts, and they say, take a look at the charts, any questions? Because you know they just want to move on. They don't really want to talk about it, right? Don't do that, right? Make data something that allows you to tell a story. Now again, the problem is, just because you can do it doesn't mean you should, right? Excel and PowerPoint allow us to commit crimes against data. We need a congressional investigation, right? As you can tell from the pie chart, the shaded blue area means nothing, right? This happens all the time. And even well-respected places sometimes mess up the data. This is something that appeared online. I think you can probably still find it. And this is a chart about online giving by region. And what they deduced was that California donors gave more than donors in any other state, and they gave them to human services organizations, blah, 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 blah. Now, if you were to see this, you might conclude, wow, we need to move from Vermont to California, that's where all the donors are, and we need to become a human services organization because that's who they're giving to. And no, you shouldn't, because this is chart junk. The problem with this data is, and I know because I asked the people who produced it, it's not normalized. So of course, California is really going to look big in the data because it's the most populous. Is California the most generous state in the union? No. It's not the most generous, it's just the most populous. I think Utah, technically speaking, is the most generous state. When you adjust, when you normalize the data and you make everyone equal, you see different things that happen, right? This is like basic statistics. You should probably normalize the data set. Instead, you might see this and predict that you should do something else. The other thing that happens sometimes is that we use data and we need to make sure we do a better job of telling the story around it. So last year I was working with an organization in DC, and they kept talking about how we had 21% growth in online giving last year, 21% growth in online giving. And about the fourth time that they said they had 21% growth in online giving, I said, stop for a second. I get it, but is that good or is that bad, right? The number, like, that's counting, not measuring. What should we do here, right? And what they really should have used is what I call is a bullet chart. This is one of the greatest inventions in data visualization that most of you probably never seen before, but I guarantee you will use after today, right? So the bullet chart is amazing because it has lots of useful things. First, it has a quantitative scale, right? It goes from 0, 35%. For that quantitative person who's in your meetings who wants to know, how much something is. It has a qualitative scale for the qualitative people in your meetings. Is that good or is that bad? Red is bad, yellow is not so good, not so bad, and green is good. And then the bullet in the chart is actual performance, right? 21%. And the line in the bullet chart is target performance. So now, if I want to know, is 21% year-over-year online growth good? The answer is yes, it's good, but it's short of what the target was. Think about all the things you learn from one simple chart in one simple way. And think of all the different people it satisfies. It satisfies the quantitative person in the meetings who wants to know how much or how little of something. It satisfies that qualitative person who just wants to know, is this good? Is this bad? Do we know? Right? And there are tools out there like Tableau and others that do bullet charts, but I just built this in PowerPoint. Like this is, 4 rectangles in a line. It's not complicated. Fake it till you make it sometimes. I would challenge you in the next week, find a reason to use a bullet chart to show something. Now, I'll warn you, when you do that, people will expect you to start doing it on a much regular basis. But that's the point, right? That we want to be able to tell a story with data. The last secret is about culture. And what I found was you can have the right data, you can have the right people, you can have the right technology, but culture is something you need to pay attention to. As Peter Drucker said, culture eats strategy for breakfast, it will eat your data strategy for lunch. Now, what I found was that there are at least 7 different culture types in the nonprofit sector around data. And the good news is, you don't have to be all of them. You just need to find which type are you, right? And they are not mutually exclusive, right? And so you might have a culture of testing, but not a culture of sharing. That's okay. Go culture of testing. Do that thing. Do your thing, right? And so throughout the book, I share examples from nonprofits that have a particular culture type. And while I don't think you change your culture, you can certainly improve on it. And if you find that, we're sort of like that, right? We have a culture of growth, or we have a culture of change or not, may determine which culture type you pick. Let me give you an example here. So I'm going to talk about public broadcasting. So this is for the kids. Downton Abbey, although I think I need to update this slide to Victoria. That's the latest rage, public television these days. Right? And so in public broadcasting, there is a culture of sharing. That culture of sharing has existed for over 20 years now. It started out because the membership director for the public station in New York City wanted to know how other stations were performing, and so she called them and asked, hey, how are you doing in this particular area? And they would share data, and then what they found out was they actually needed to benchmark that data, and they needed to count things the same way. And so over 20 years, there's a really rich history of sharing data because WGBH in Boston doesn't believe it competes with KQED in San Francisco. So they're more than happy to share data because they don't believe they compete with each other. They're happy to share stuff. Now, to be clear, not every organization is that way. In the book, there's a great story from World Wildlife Fund, John Schwash. They don't have a culture of sharing. They don't like to share amongst departments or different groups. They have a culture of testing. They love to test stuff, do not have a culture of sharing, right? But in public broadcasting, there's a culture of sharing. And one of the challenges that they ran into a few years ago is that they looked at the numbers and they had lost roughly 1 million donors. And they realized that if they didn't do something, the whole system was sort of in peril. And so they had some funding from the Corporation for Public Broadcasting and some funding from WGBH, and they started this program called CDP. It's called the Contributor Development Partnership. When it first started out, it was only 35 stations. It's now over 200. And the way the program works is some very specific things that they do because they're willing to share data. For starters, every quarter, every station gets this report. It's called the ROAR report, the Revenue, Opportunity, and Action Report. Now, it looks like reports you may have seen before, right? Here's the thing we're measuring. How did we do last quarter? How are we doing this quarter? Right? When the ROAR report first started, they were measuring about 15 metrics. Now there's about 27 metrics. But the innovative thing is actually in the last two columns, which is they measured, because they had everyone participating and everyone sharing, they were able to tell a station, how am I doing? And then what's a good value? Good value being, what if I was a B student instead of a C student, right? And they very purposefully don't focus on who are the best stations. Because what they found was, if all you did was tell people about the best stations, everyone would find an excuse of why they couldn't be the best station. And so they don't do that. They just say, all I'm trying to do is get you to be good. Not the best, not perfect, just good. And if you're good at something, what is the revenue opportunity of being good at it? Which is a complete game changer for measuring stuff. Because it used to be that they would get all these metrics, but they wouldn't know, well, which one should I try and improve at? Because I don't sort of know what the value of getting better at something is. And so today, with the ROAR report, every quarter they get this report. And they can decide, should I focus on first-year member retention? Should I focus on matching gifts? They can actually see what's the revenue opportunity of getting better at a particular thing. And again, they can do this because at its heart, they have a culture of willing to share data. And it allows them to do something different with data than they've ever done before. The last thing I close on is this. At the beginning, I talked about Lyman Pierce. And later on in his life, he wrote a book called How to Raise Money. And he talks about the 11 sort of fundamental things of a successful campaign. Timeliness, competent direction, ample resources. These things are all still true today. They're not different. But if Lyman Pierce was alive today, I can guarantee you he would be using data and analytics to drive this stuff, right? It's not that the fundamentals are different. It's what tools and options do we have available to us that change things. And I know that in this sector, we talk a lot about the art of fundraising or the art of engagement. There's a lot of art in what we do. And I'm not dismissing that. But we can't forget that there's some science to it as well, and that we shouldn't make this false distinction that it's a choice. It's art or science, it's good or bad, it's day or night, right? We have a sort of a grammar problem here. It's art and science. It's good and bad. It's day and night. You need both of these things in some balance to work, right? Fundraising is an art and a science, in part because without science, there can be no art, right? It enables you to do what you do better and more effectively. It doesn't take away from that. AI is not going to replace anyone's job in this room. It's going to allow you to do what you do to be more effective at it. Thanks.
So we have a couple things. We have time for questions. So if
And
you-
answers.
And answers.
Yeah, we'll take both.
We'll take both. So I have a little mic if you want to ask a question. And then also we have copies of Steve's book on the back, and there are 22 copies left if you'd like to get one. And also there are surveys. Speaking of data, there are surveys on your table. And we thought we would use this opportunity to collect some data about the state of the sector, because some of our funders are interested in where to direct their resources, so that's quite helpful. So we also want you to know that you could win big if you fill out one of those surveys and put your email address on it. You could win some free training at Common Good Vermont, which of course is listed in your beautiful program that we made with our new fancy copier. Okay, so I have the microphone, so if anybody would like to ask questions.
You want to take this one and I'll take the,
Yeah, we could do that too.
make it easy?
Yeah, we could make it easy. Do you know how to turn that on?
I'll try.
Okay. All right, here we
I'm
go.
good with technology.
All right. And also Steve's going to sign books in the back at the end for you. Okay, questions? Yes, Nina.
Thank you. Really great talk.
Thanks.
I am curious how you detect garbage data. For instance, on a certain social media account, I'll be turning 110 this year. How do you get the outliers out of data so that the results that you get really are good?
It's a good question. So first, I think you have to institute the no garbage rule at your organization, which is don't collect it if you're not planning to use it and there's not a valuable purpose for its use. There's a tendency for people to over-collect this stuff. There could be a TV show about data hoarding that would probably get high ratings, right? If people collect this data over and over again. So that's part of it, is deciding, where are you collecting it. The other thing is certainly do you have a culture that values having that data be quality in the first place? And that's sometimes hard, right? This is why I think it does come down to a cultural piece. So for example, my last name gets misspelled all the time. And wouldn't you know it, sometimes I get mail from nonprofits where my name is misspelled. And wouldn't it be useful to know, what does that cost a nonprofit? How much does it cost to have a typo in your data? Well, we looked at that. We found out that when you have a typo on the name of a donor, it costs you about 10% in retention, so about 10% of them stop giving to you because you misspelled their name, or at least there's correlation there. And you lose anywhere between 10 and 12% on uplift. So they keep giving to you, but they give you less. And it just happens that you also misspelled their name. Now, that adds up to a lot. Like, that's real money at some point for a typo. So then ask yourself, who is the associate vice president for typos at your organization, right? There's no one whose job is to fix the typos. It's because it's not anyone's job. It's the organization. It's a culture thing. Go back to your, how do we get typos? Who is responsible for that? How do we collectively make sure that that type of stuff doesn't happen? Because when you know the value of it, suddenly, ooh, that typo, actually, I want to know now because I can tell that it's costing me something. I'm losing something because of it. That's a culture thing, right? To think about, okay, where are all the points that data comes in, and are we doing a good job in terms of making sure it's clean when it comes in the first place, is one place to start.
Other questions? Yeah. Shanna, do you have one? Yeah, we have, and then another one in the back. Go ahead, Shanna. It's on.
Right. So you had mentioned about getting more donors to use going on the internet and donating that way electronically. And you had said, well, is this that number, the percentage of 21%?
Yeah, it's about 7.2% of giving happens online, yeah.
Okay, and if that's a good thing or a bad thing?
It's a thing.
It is. It's a thing,
Yeah.
absolutely. And for a nonprofit that I had served on, I remember trying to, the board was trying to push people to using that method rather than maybe sending in a check. I mean, we had all avenues.
Yeah.
But I'm wondering, why do we want people to do that? What is the benefit? What is the advantage over the disadvantage?
I think the way you put that is perfect, which is to ask, why do we want that? Is that a thing we want? Why do we want that? So, the internet is great, but vast majority of giving still happens the old-fashioned way, right? I think what we have to do in the nonprofit sector is to begin to separate the channel by which we engage people and the channel where the transaction takes place. So again, this is a historical problem. It used to be that the only way people made a gift is we would send them a direct mail piece with a business reply envelope. They would write a check, and they would send back that device to us, and we'd say, oh, well, the letter I sent is the reason I got the donation. And we sort of put channel of engagement with channel of transaction together. And then Al Gore invents the internet, and online giving comes along, and it messes that all up. Because it could be that I got that direct mail piece, but I went online and gave, or I saw something on social media, or I saw an advert, or I got the magazine. And now this drives fundraisers and marketers crazy because it's not so easy, right? Because for decades we've been obsessed with channel attribution, which is really code word for, do I get credit for the money or not? That's why do most people care about? Because it's probably because do they get credit, right? And so what you've seen over the past decade is a lot of nonprofits have stopped putting direct marketing here and online over here and thought of it, no, they're just channels. We should probably think about them holistically. And do we really care how we get the gift? Probably not, as long as we're consistent about it. As I showed you, retention for online donors is lower, almost 10 points lower than offline. Does that mean that online donors are less loyal? No, I'd be willing to bet online donors probably get treated differently by most nonprofits. That we make these assumptions of things like, oh, they're an online person, so they're never going to want mail, they're never going to want a phone call. But the mistake we're making there is we think channel of engagement is the same thing as channel of transaction. It might just been easier to make the gift online, right? I don't know where my checkbook is at the moment. I know somewhere at home in a cabinet it's there, but going online would just be easier, right? And so I think we should think about it holistically. Now, there may be reasons why we want that gift to be online. The average online gift is $128. That's much higher than your average offline gift, so there's a reason why you might want that. In theory, the cost is lower, it's more immediate, there's lots of benefits, but I would say you want more people to give online if that's what they prefer to do, but it doesn't mean we can ignore all the other ways in which we engage people. We live in a multi-channel world, and we need to continue to do that, right? Even millennials like to get stuff in the mail, right? It does happen, it is true, and so we need to pay attention to that stuff as well. Yeah.
So one of the benefits, I think, of an online gift is that your name doesn't get misspelled.
Assuming you spell your name correctly, yes.
And with that, if it feeds your central database, then that's great. And we use eTapestry.
Yep.
And it does. What the real problem, though, is not the channel of engagement. It is what do you do with it once you get it? And I suspect most nonprofits, at least of the size that I'm working with, we don't have a data person. We don't have anybody actually looking at the donors and trying to figure it out. And so I just wanted you to know, I'm going to go away today. We just made some major changes. We're doing some major things to our organization, the Chaffee Art Center in Rutland. I'm making a pitch here. And anybody wants to donate, let me know. I'm right here. But the point is that that's all going on between now and October with the grand reopening, and it's huge the amount of work we have to do. But I really think that the main thing we need to do is get a handle on how we handle donors, track them, and know that we made an effort to reconnect with them. So if I give online and it's the first time I give, somebody needs to call me. Right? We just instituted a new process where when a donation comes in, there's a time frame to get the letter done. The letter must come to the board. The board must initial, sign off, make a note, and if it's over a certain amount, make a phone call. Now the question is, what do we do 6 months later? The problem is having staffing and resources to do that consistently and having the right person to do that consistently, because otherwise it doesn't really work. And I believe that's the major thing I will take away from the talk today, is that it's what you do with the data and the quality of the data and the analyzing of it. We'll never be able to do it to the level that your book suggests, but we can do better. So I just want to thank you for the talk today.
No, I absolutely agree. I mean, it's what you do with the data and how you use that to make decisions. Although I think what you will start to find is, I don't think it's going forward, it's going to be less about, do I have the person or the people who sort of crank the machine to make it happen? Because what we really should start relying on is the technology to make that stuff harder. All the things you described about what do we do when a gift comes in, and all the things that happen, organizations have created these complex processes, right? The candle burns to the rope, it releases the mouse, the letter gets signed, but why isn't all that as automated as much as possible, right? If we know that the optimal time to send a thank you letter based on a gift is within a certain period of time, why don't we just try and, why doesn't the technology automate as much of that, right? There's a tendency for false precision on things like this. There was some research done into thank you letters, and what they found is 50% of donors don't care about thank you letters. The other 50% really care about thank you letters. So which is which? I think part of it is your ability to, can technology help you do this stuff at scale? Because a lot of what you're describing is marketing automation, right? And you can still be authentic and genuine, but you can also have it automated and make sure that it works. And I think that's where, whether that gift came online or it's a phone call or something else, the ability to respond to that and engage with people, because there's a ticking clock once that engagement happens. And you want to be able to do that over a period of time for sure. Yeah.
Yeah, on the topic of sharing that you mentioned, do you mean like sharing of data, like address lists and so forth? Or do you mean like sharing of approaches, like we tried this and this was successful or this wasn't? And the reason I'm asking partly is I get through email various fundraiser emails. I sign up for, I think, 2 organizations that, one's national, one's in Vermont, that deal with a certain particular issue. And then over time I've started getting emails from 2 other ones. And it's all good that they're all, focusing on it. We need more attention in that area. But I often, I get these things and I go, well, I never donated to them, but I'd like to, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
It causes confusion for the donors even. And I'm just wondering if there's any research on that, given the 2% disposable income number. And also I've noticed in another issue area that there was two nonprofits that eventually merged.
Oh, yeah.
Maybe rather than competing against each other. So I'm just curious on that.
Yeah, so the sharing of email lists, bad, don't do it, ever. Email gets really tricky. It's really, what you want are people who've opted in to receive mail, so I would never share or buy an email list. An organically acquired email address is always going to perform better than something else. It does happen in the direct mail world. All right, there's list sharing, there's co-ops and things like that, but partly because the reality is your donors and supporters are everyone else's donors and supporters. I know every so often I hear someone say, no, Steve, you don't understand. Our donors are different. They are different and they're unique, and all the stuff you just said will not work because they're different. And I have to tell them, no, they're not. This will be a scary statistic. 82% of giving in the US happens from about 10% of donors. It's worse than Pareto. Pareto is usually 80-20. This is 82-10, right? Of the truly charitable folks in the US. I'm not counting, I was in the checkout line and they gave $2 to the food bank. That doesn't really count, right? We're talking people who give on a very consistent basis and are very generous. And so the reality is all of our supporters are usually the same types of individuals. And given a world where there's lots of choice, what we continue to see in the data is people are not necessarily loyal to an organization, but they are loyal to causes that they care about. And I do believe that organizations who improve their performance, who do a better job of engagement and stewardship, can drive results. You can set your watch by it. Every year or so, there's an organization that has an issue, a challenge, a scandal, but their donors don't disappear. What they tend to do is give to similar causes, right? You probably recall a number of years ago there were issues with Susan G. Komen. Did people stop giving to Susan G. Komen? Yes. Did people stop giving to breast cancer? No. They went to other organizations who were doing that. Wounded Warriors last year, right? Did people stop giving to Wounded Warriors? Yes. Did they continue to support veterans' causes? Yes. They just went to other organizations. So it's definitely something you see happen where folks will choose to be loyal to a particular cause, not always necessarily an organization. Yeah.
I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit about evaluating program impact, not donors and fundraising, in terms of especially a new program or kind of a new iteration of a program that you've had in the past and figuring out what data points to track, and you want to kind of cast your net wide enough to collect a bunch for a while and kind of figure out what's important, but obviously not wasting your time doing a million things that you're not going to use. Where's the balance of kind of at that starting or semi-starting point?
Yeah, it's a great question. And obviously, program evaluation, measurement is super important. I'd argue it's easier if you're starting with a new program or starting over. It's trickier if you've got established programs and no data. We've been doing it for years, but no data, that's harder. I think part of it is start with asking yourself, what would be the outcomes and impacts? How would we know this is working? How do we know? What would be evidence that something is working? And then you work your way back to what is it we collect. Now, when I say that, I think it's really important. I'm not interested in outputs. Outputs and outcomes get confused all the time, right? We provided 3 million library books. No, that's an output. Outcome would be, did you increase childhood literacy? That's actually what I'm interested in. But there's a tendency sometimes where, well, we sent this many emails or we did this many things. No, that's an output. That's not an outcome. I would say start with, if you ask yourself, what would happen? What would be the change that we see that tells us this is working? And then work your way back to, okay, well, how would we know that? Well, we know it because of these things, okay? How would we measure those things, right? And if you ask yourself why about 5 times, I think you'll get to the answer of what is it we would have to collect. What I find time and time again is most of the work on the outcome side that funders and foundations want is on the programmatic side. That if you weren't tracking it on the programmatic side, it's really hard to get that down the road. But once you sort of know what that evidence is for it and you start tracking it, you can build it up over time. Yeah. Go ahead.
Thanks very much, Steve. I'm Phelan Fretz. I run a local science center called ECHO. My question to you is actually, we're a Blackbaud user and have moved into the All True and done all that work. And I think there's a general question for all of which is, what can we expect from our software providers to help us propel us toward the work that you see as more predictive models?
Yeah, it's a great question. I would say you need to be vocal with your software vendors and tell them, yes, we want more of this and maybe less of other things. There's a tendency in the software world to really focus on sort of incremental features, right? Oh, we put that button there, we made the button blue, look at that blue button. I I guess I spent years building those features, and now I'm not as interested in the blue button as I am. Why doesn't the system just do it for you? Or to what degree could you automate certain types of stuff? And as obviously I showed in some of the examples, we've been pretty focused on that over the past 3 years or so, of trying to be more prescriptive and recommend things. Even folks who have been doing it for a long time and know everything like defaults. They like somewhere to start with. They like a recommendation, right? And so I think the more that we can do that type of stuff is certainly helpful. The other thing I think is true is look and see what you see as being examples of what you like in the other technology you use, and look for that as being examples of things you're probably likely to use in the future, right? What is it your favorite mobile app does that you enjoy? What's the equivalent of that in the professional side? What could it do? How could it help with things?
We have time for a couple more questions. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you for the presentation. So I was curious, I was thinking about a small community like Burlington and a lot of people looking for the funds from this small pond of, anyhow, everybody's vying for the same dollars. So I'm curious to what extent you or other people are bringing people working on a single issue, but multiple organizations in a community to analyze data and then kind of cut up the pie in a different way so that people aren't overlapping and competing for the same dollars in the same way that they do now?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, I think there are certain organizations and certain groups where there's more collaboration, collaborative benchmarking. It's interesting, I see a lot of collaborative benchmarking on the arts organizations, because again, if you are the symphony or the zoo or the art museum, that your supporters are probably similar types of individuals, and so I actually see a lot more sharing happen in the arts organizations. Don't see it as much in education, maybe because there's this illusion of competition or something like that. But certainly there are examples of where collaboration can happen. Part of it is just the simple act of sitting down and let's talk about, hey, what are we seeing versus what someone else may be seeing, and then using that as a basis to look at stuff. The other thing too is, while benchmarking is important and useful, oftentimes, if I were to ask 10 organizations in this room what you do with matching gifts, I'm likely to get 10 different answers about what you do with matching gifts. But I don't think there's probably 10 different best ways to do matching gifts. There's probably just 1 or 2 best ways to do matching gifts. And so I think whenever you want to collaborate with other organizations, you probably are doing something really good or doing really well at something that someone else struggles with. The more you can explain, well, what is it that you do that's different? And those are usually the bright spots. Like in matching gifts, turns out organizations who do really well with matching gifts do many things, but one simple thing they do is they take everyone who made a matching gift last year and they purposely reach out to them to make sure they make a matching gift the following year. Well, that sounds so obvious. Yeah? How many of you do it? How many of you are writing down, get a list of all people who made matching gifts last year and ask them to match a gift again, right? I mean, it's things like that you'd probably be amazed at what you would pick up by just meeting on some regular basis. But I would focus on not sort of, hey, what's everyone doing, but what's the thing you believe you do really well, and focus on that, because I think there's opportunity to learn from others. One more?
Hi, thanks for the presentation.
Sure.
I really appreciated bringing culture into the best practices. And I'm curious, when you were doing the research, where did a culture of continual learning, acceptable risk without punishment, and curiosity play in?
Where was the Utopia organization?
Some of us actually strive for those things.
So one of the culture types is a culture type of agile. So agile comes from the software development world. Build, measure, learn. You try and do that as quickly as possible. And it turns out that those agile concepts that build better software can actually be applied to an organization. In particular, in the book, I talk about the Humane Society and Volunteer Match. And both of those organizations have an agile culture. Like literally at the Humane Society, so in software development, when you do agile, you have a thing called a stand-up meeting. It's usually a 10-minute meeting every day where everyone stands, no one sits, and you go around and you talk about what did you work on yesterday, and what are you working on today, and what are things that are going to prevent you from doing what you need to do. It's a very short meeting. So at the Humane Society, in their marketing communications department, they have a stand-up meeting. And they stand up around in a circle and they talk about what are you working on today, or what did you work on yesterday, what got completed, what are you working on today, what might prevent you from getting that accomplished. Another thing that turns out when you do that for 10 minutes every day is you eliminate longer, boring meetings where everyone reports out, because you know what's happening, because every day you talk to people for 10 minutes. You know exactly what Bob and Susie and Kim are working on, right? That's an agile mindset, and that allows them to move much, much faster because they constantly know what's happening, and it also allows them to pivot and make changes when they find out, there's a big announcement coming, there's a big event that's happening, there's something that's happening on the advocacy side, we need to quickly adjust. You're able to do that because you're sort of you have that regular communication on a daily basis, and it's more of an agile mindset of moving quickly. The issue around risk aversion, again, comes down to culture. And really, it's about having a culture of willing to embrace change. It's a funny thing about humans. Everyone loves change, but no one likes changing. And so it's really hard sometimes, because oftentimes that change, we take it personal, like, oh, how will that affect my job? Or, how will that impact what I'm doing on a day-to-day basis, right? And so some organizations are much better culturally about embracing change, and that allows them to have a higher risk tolerance. And if anything, I would say that the faster you move, or the quicker you're able to make decisions and move forward, the higher your tolerance could be for risk. Risk is a problem when you make a decision and then 12 months later, you know it's a bad idea and you continue to do it, right? Versus, after 30 days, this wasn't working, we're going to stop doing it. We're going to move forward, right? Again, if you took a smaller slice of time, you probably could tolerate more risk because you knew that, for example, you're going to try something and after 30 days, if it's not working, we'll stop. Then you know what your exposure is. It just changes your mindset about it. But again, you sort of have to, if you want to have more risk, you have to embrace change a bit more as well. Great. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, Steve.
Thanks.
Thanks, everyone. We have books that Steve can sign in the back if you'd like to get one, Data-Driven Nonprofits. We also have more refreshments and dessert, so please feel free to have some and mingle amongst yourselves. And don't forget, if you have the opportunity to fill out our little data request, our survey, that would be really quite helpful for us. So thank you, everyone. Have a great spring, and thanks for joining us today. And we'll be sending out the video link and the slides, so you'll have access to those after the event. Thanks to Channel 17.